At the height of Queen Victoria's reign, her empire covered a quarter of the globe. In 1879, Southern Africa was ripe for conquest, and 9 battalions of the British Army had been dispatched to steamroll their way to power, equipped with state-of-the-art weapons. But one tribe was about to stand in their way: the Zulus.
There was a feeling that armed with such weapons, how could anybody defeat the British Army? Surely they were the best in the world. And certainly a bunch of black men armed with pointy sticks weren't going to get one over on them.
But in one battle, by the eerie half-light of a solar eclipse, the Zulus slaughtered virtually an entire column of the British Army, 1,300 men, in the space of 2.5 hours. With only 60 British soldiers left to tell the tale, the military elite shoved the details of this humiliating defeat to the back shelf of history and cast the Zulus forever as a bloody, primitive tribe that just got lucky.
The image that has been projected by historians of the Zulu people is that of raging, snarling, bloodthirsty savages out to massacre their enemies. No. No.
Since then, no one has fathomed how one of the greatest fighting forces the world had ever known could be wiped out by a tribe of warriors carrying only clubs and spears. Now there's a chance to find out. For the first time, a team of ballistics experts, pharmacologists and archaeologists have been assembled to conduct a forensic examination of the battlefield at Isandlwana. In 1879, a massacre at the hands of primitive tribesmen should have been inconceivable. The British Army was one of the largest professional fighting forces in the world. It was as used to taking on the great military empires of Europe as it was the indigenous peoples of Asia and Africa. It could draw on 150,000 soldiers. It boasted over 140 battalions, artillery, cavalry and infantry, and it had the most technologically advanced firepower at its disposal. The crowning hour of the British Redcoats came with the Battle of Rourke's Drift, given the epic treatment by the movie Zulu that made Michael Caine a star. This one conflict was cynically promoted by the Victorian military elite to draw attention away from a far larger, more decisive battle, which took place the same afternoon. One where an entire British battalion was massacred by the Zulus, making Rourke's Drift look little more than a skirmish. The Battle of Isandlwana.
This was really the worst defeat suffered by the British Army during the Victorian era. All the commanding officers were killed. Nobody who fought on foot in this battle actually got away at all. It was extremely apocalyptic in terms of the casualty roll. Really, the camp was wiped out, and almost nobody lived to tell the tale.
The devastation was discovered on January 22nd, 1879, by another part of the British invasionary force. When they arrived at the base of Isandlwana mountain, they found the burning camp they had left that morning, littered with the bloody remains of over 1,000 fellow soldiers.
The battlefield was carpeted in dead men and dead animals. Somebody says that you couldn't put a foot a yard in any direction without stepping over a dead body. Of course, most of the British bodies had been disemboweled by the Zulus in accordance with their ritual practices. People lay down to sleep, waking up in the morning to find that they'd been lying next to corpses. So they had the most ghastly night here, which, as somebody said, stretched their nerves almost to breaking point.
One of the dead was Sergeant Thomas Cooper, When his private papers were found in a family attic only a couple of years ago, they gave historian Ian Knight an altogether more personal reason to see the whole case re-examined. Sergeant Cooper was his great-uncle.
There were a small and very poignant collection of papers relating to this family death. A couple of memorial cards, a couple of photographs of him in uniform, and a very, very brief message written to Sergeant Cooper's sister by one of his commanding officers. And it had clearly been written by a regimental clerk who presumably had 800 or 900 of these to fill in. And it said, "Dear blank, I regret to inform you that your blank was killed on the 22nd of January last. I regret I cannot give further or fuller information." And obviously the officer had gone through and filled in the details of, in this case it was your brother, and put the details at the end of where he was killed, and signed it at the end.
It wasn't difficult for the British to bury details of the massacre. With so few reports from British survivors and a smattering of accounts from Zulu warriors, what really happened that day is shrouded in mystery. Now Ian Knight has joined forces with forensic archaeologist Tony Pollard to see the whole battle investigated.
What we have to remember is that so few men survived this battle that the eyewitness accounts that are actually written down are very sparse and few and far between. If we view ourselves, if you like, as sort of forensic scientists looking at a crime scene, if you can call a battle a crime, and look at the physical remains, and through those physical remains, through their distribution across the field, start to tell the story from a different angle, from the angle of objects that have been dropped during the course of that battle.
The most obvious place to look for some clue to this defeat is in the stone cairns that mark the graves of British soldiers. The redcoat buried here had his escape cut off by the Manzimyama River after being pursued for 2 miles through thorn trees and rocky ground. For Ian Knight, the bloody truth of what happened to his own great-uncle has become very real.
I found it quite a moving experience to be delving amongst the bones of men who were killed here, looking on the face of my own dead relative. And I think certainly it's brought home the horror of this particular battle to me in a way that written accounts, even though you read them all the time when you're studying it, never quite does.
The graves have been badly eroded by the intense heat and looted by scavengers. Very little has been left behind.
There's a piece of occipital bone here, which is the back of the head, which is just about here. It's quite a thick bone. That's probably why it survived so well, so close to the surface. We've also got a piece of petrous temporal here, which is actually a bone from inside the skull. The inner ear bones are inside this piece of bone. And then we found, just about half an hour ago, we found a whole tooth. It's quite a large molar.
The excavation of the cairn hasn't told the team too much, but their overall positioning down what is known as the Fugitives' Trail speaks volumes. Like the chalky outlines of victims at a murder scene, they pinpoint the exact spots where the British soldiers were cut down as they fled for their lives.
Right, we're just below the saddle with the mountain on the left there, and this is where the fugitives started to spill back from the camp as the things started to go dreadfully wrong, as the firing lines broke up and the men started to retreat back into the camp. The choreography and the history of this battle is actually marked out in the landscape. As far away as the front firing lines, you'll start to come across white cairns. And we also know that the Fugitives' Trail takes the route it does because it's mapped out physically with these cairns. And you can see the first slot here. These poor guys didn't get very far off the saddle at all before they were hit, and actually go all the way down toward the river, which was the ultimate aim of these guys. A few men got across there, but most of them ended up under these cairns.
From written accounts of the day and the physical evidence, the course of the battle could now be charted. The Zulus had gathered above the British camp and then executed a perfect encircling maneuver, known as the Horns of the Bull.
This is our simplified version of the Zulu attack on the British camp at Isandlwana. Here's our Isandlwana mountain, here's the Nglutu or Inyoni ridge, here's the British camp stretched out across the foot of the mountain. Now the Zulu commanders were up on an escarpment on the edge of the Inyoni here, which gave them a very good commanding view of the whole battlefield area. And the Zulu right horn comes round from behind the ridge here, sweeps round the back of Isandlwana, the left horn comes round on this side and sweeps round that way, and the chest, the main body, comes over the ridge itself and advances straight at the British camp. Now the British are driven from their advanced positions in front of the camp back through it by the chest, and as they do so, the horns come in and almost cut them off on either side. And the last remnants are driven down this broken area which we call the Fugitives Trail, across some very wild country until they end up here on the banks of the Manzimnyama River, where the last groups are brought to bay and wiped out.
The most obvious explanation for the British defeat is that 1,600 British soldiers were simply outnumbered by 20,000 Zulus. But theoretically, the British state-of-the-art weapon, the Martini-Henry rifle, should have swung the balance in their favour. The National Army Museum back in England has agreed to bring some of the original rifles out of storage to show why.
Right, this is a Martini-Henry rifle, which is .45 calibre. This is a bullet for Martini-Henry, 45 calibre and weighs 480 grains of lead. The Martini-Henry rifle in ideal conditions was probably the most effective weapon the British Army had seen for many years. It's like having a modern fighter plane or tank.
This was the first breech-loading gun. Highly trained redcoats at an optimal level could fire about 10 rounds a minute. At that rate, even if they hit their target once every other shot, in principle they could have wiped out the Zulu army in under 6 minutes.
And there's a penetration hole. The round's just gone straight on and through the Zulu as well.
The rifle's maximum range was 1,400 yards.
Clean as anything.
British military analysts from the time estimated that African warriors, given the rocky terrain and the weight of their weapons, would be within rifle range for 13 crucial minutes before reaching the British front line.
Yeah, that should be okay. Should be able to get that, shouldn't you?
Ballistic soap has the same thickness as a human body and the same density as human flesh. It demonstrates the penetrative power of the Martini-Henry rifle.
Look at that, Roger. The size of the entry wound compared to the bullet, it's twice the diameter. God, look at that. Enormous. Bigger than a 50p piece. It is. It's gone straight for that Zulu and for another one.
Ballistics tests seem to support the faith the British put in their weaponry. In fact, in battles later that year, it was with this rifle they saw off enemy forces 10 times their size. So how else could the defeat be explained? One British survivor suggested that ammunition may not have been reaching the front line.
The argument runs that over-officious British quartermasters refused to issue ammunition at the crucial times. Bit of a tradition in British military history to blame the quartermaster if something goes wrong, and therefore the British were unable to get fresh supplies through to their firing line at the height of the battle, and that this created a lull in their firing which the Zulus were able to exploit to overcome the British positions.
But the team is skeptical. Evidence from the battlefield is telling them that ammunition was reaching the British lines.
This is a standard issue ammunition box of the time. As you can see, it was destined for Natal. Sturdy timber box with brass straps with a series of screws holding the straps in on the top. A couple of larger screws on either side holding the side wooden plates on. But the thing we're really interested in is the middle section, which is the opening section. Now that would actually be held closed with a large screw like that, simply screwed in here, and then once that was removed, that slipped off. The top here, although it's missing at the moment, would have had, if you like, a sort of sardine can arrangement with heavy galvanized tin, and what you would do, you would have a ring at the end that you put your hand in and simply pull it back, and then you'd be free to access the bullets inside.
The key piece of evidence which leaves them in no doubt that ammunition was in ready supply has been found right out at the site of the British front line. The metal ring pulls from the top of the boxes.
These were found quite a way out on the firing line, well in advance of the camp. Not far behind, we think, the main firing line, but certainly some distance from the camp. And these would have actually fitted on to the corner like that. And the fact that we're finding definite evidence for ammunition boxes being opened on the line certainly suggests that they're being supplied as the battle is raging. Men aren't simply having to run back to the wagons to get packets of bullets. They're delivering whole boxes to the line.
Seeking to explain the defeat, certain historians have come up with another theory. Perhaps just getting the boxes up to the front line wasn't enough. Maybe it took too long to carefully unscrew the lids to these boxes and get at the bullets. But these screws, strangely bent out of shape, dug up from the battlefield, may show that this wasn't a problem either. Ian Knight believes he can show not only why they are bent, but also why the massacre cannot be blamed on a shortage of ammunition. When the going got tough, it seems there was a far simpler way to open up the boxes.
The 24th was a very experienced regiment and would have been in action many times before, using these rifles, using this ammunition box. It's always seemed pretty inconceivable to me that they wouldn't know how to get into their own ammunition boxes. I think personally, if I was there on the day, I would find absolutely any means available possible to get into this thing. I think that nothing would stimulate imagination under these circumstances more than 20,000 warriors coming to kill you. Our weapon of choice for this particular experiment is the butt end of a Martini-Henry carbine, which I guess would be pretty much the thing that they would have been using on the day here. Okay, well, let's see if we can get it into a good practical position.
Right, so we're in battle. On the rock.
Yeah, get it fairly secure, put my foot on it. And then, here we go. Here goes my reputation.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
How's that? Comes out first time.
There we go. Instant and ready access. Just like that. And then you can see there the screws quite nicely bent with the blow.
Because it really will lay to rest once and for all one of the sort of hoary old myths about the battle.
The slaughter of the British troops by a primitive tribe cannot be fully explained by a lack of men, a lack of firepower, and certainly not by a lack of ammunition. Could the reason be something else? Something far more unworldly? Battle of Isandlwana saw over 1,000 colonial soldiers massacred at the hands of the Zulus. But how could the British, a fighting force that had abandoned swords and shields centuries before, be wiped out by a technologically inferior tribe of warriors? Forensic science was about to fill in the blanks left by history. The British Army's Martini-Henry rifle, in ideal conditions, should never have let them down. But on January 22nd, 1879, there was another, more unusual factor at play. Every time the rifle was fired, a cloud of white gunpowder smoke was blasted from the barrel.
It used black powder in its cartridge as propellant, and most of this ended up as dense white smoke in front of you. So when you're looking for this very narrow rear sight, you couldn't see if you'd hit your target until a few seconds of smoke had cleared. Now this is all right if you're an individual shooting. When you've got 1,000 men shooting, you've got a dense white wall of smoke, and men could appear from out of this wall of smoke, and they were just on top of you before you realised it.
But on the afternoon of the battle, it wasn't just the smoke that reduced the visibility for the British soldiers. There was something else. A solar eclipse. To test the effect of the eclipse, the ambient light in the firing range is reduced. Smoke, coupled with lower light levels, makes the target harder and harder to see.
When you're blasting away with walls of smoke in front of you and someone switches your lights out, what can you see then? You're completely in the dark, literally.
Poor visibility may have impaired the accuracy of the British and given the Zulus extra time, but it could not explain away this crushing defeat. "40 years of apartheid in South Africa have meant history has never been told from a black point of view. It was time to reappraise the battle from a Zulu perspective. The Zulus faced overwhelming firepower, and they only had those 13 minutes to reach the British lines. But once they were able to engage in hand-to-hand combat, their weapons came into their own.
These are close-quarter Zulu weapons. They would have been used in the most frenzied stage of the battle, in the final stages, when the Zulus have finally got hand-to-hand. And most of the British soldiers at the Battle of Isandlwana would have been killed with one or the other of these weapons. This is a knobkerry. It's known as, in Zulu as iwisa. Most of them had a polished round head, although you do get faceted ones like this, so this is probably going to give us quite a good impression of the type of injuries that would be caused by a weapon like this.
It is easy to understand both the Zulus' push to engage in hand-to-hand combat and the British soldiers' determination to avoid it.
As you can see, it's completely disrupted the skull here. It split it longitudinally in two, straight down the middle. In a living person, the skin around the skull would have held it together to an extent, but you would have still have got this massive fracturing.
This is a stabbing spear, which was the main Zulu weapon for killing at close quarters. It's actually called iqwa, which is the noise that it makes when you pull it out of somebody's body. It's stuck right through the skull there, and it doesn't particularly want to come out. You can see the point of the spear has come out the other side.
This is a typical example of sharp force trauma with a thin blade. You've got this clean break across here, and then you've got radiating fractures going off to the side here and to the side here as well. Pretty deadly.
The mystery was, how were the Zulus able to outmaneuver the British and get to close quarter combat at all? The answer may lie with the Zulu Inyangas. These traditional medicine men are the custodians of Zulu oral history. One of them who fought that day handed down tales of the battle to his grandson, Credo Mutwa.
The war machine of the Zulu nation was backed up by a highly sophisticated medical corps, a corps of healers and traditional surgeons whose purpose was to heal all kinds of wounds that an army could sustain in battle. If you look at the skull here, you might say this is a black magic object. No, this is a thing of education, where a healer of high caliber was taught what to do when he met various kinds of head injury on a warrior or an ordinary person. For example, if a warrior had been hit on the head with a heavy battle club, I had to make a hole not far from the injury. Then the evil spirit, or rather the pressure in the skull, would make a sound like a cold drink bottle being opened. It would go psh. And what will happen is that the warrior will leave.
While the British had their captains and generals, the Zulus had their medicine men, and they weren't there just to dress wounds. At Isandlwana, they took their place behind the Zulu commanders on the Notu Ridge, above the British camp. That day, it was their task to unify the 20,000 warriors into an indestructible fighting force.
And they were just in front of their warriors, their Zulu indunas, about 2 meters. They were sitting facing Isandlwana mountain. The Zulus behind them were just singing their song. And that song got louder and louder until it reached like a crescendo when a single war cry was heard. Usutu! Now the Zulus, as they sang, they pick up their knees, drive their foot onto the ground. They're now singing Ji, Ji, wrangling their assegai against their shields. Ji, 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 Ji. 10,000 Zulu warriors singing just like that, making a loud noise.
The Zulu commander had good reason to be confident.
As he saw his warriors in their attack position, he looked back and laughed to his men. And he stood on his feet. He drove his feet onto the ground. And he bellowed, "Portuguesa! Kill them!"
Their unity sprung from a series of war chants, dances, and mysterious rituals still performed on occasion by the medicine men, though rarely for the public. Ian Knight has been invited to witness one of these pre-battle ceremonies. He is certain that if there is a secret to the Zulus' victory at Isandlwana, he will find it here.
The Zulus were certainly incredibly focused upon their enemy. They went through a whole series of rituals before they set off on campaign, which effectively cut them off from everyday civilian life. Once you'd undergone these rituals, your whole psychological intent was to go out and kill the enemy. And they lived in this sort of universe of battle with everything focused upon the destruction of the invader until they'd actually gone out there and fought them, with the result that this was unleashed in a terrific sort of frenzy of violence, if you like, at the height of the battle itself.
The effect of these rituals is to unify the troops with a common sense of purpose.
Had to be bound together, friend to friend, group to group. You had to act as one. In battle, you had to look after each other. Now, people, when acting in a ritual, fuse together and become one critical mass facing an enemy. It's as simple as that.
Using the psychology of ritual was only the first stage in the preparation of the warrior by the medicine man. British war reporters who spoke to warriors recorded how they had smashed the British camp with an extraordinary ferocity, how they thought they were impervious to bullets, and how they were in an almost unnatural mental state.
They picture themselves as being in a very intense state of mind. They say that they're seeing nothing but red. They're almost consumed with a type of bloodlust. They talk about seeing apes dressed in British uniforms manning the British positions, and they seem to suggest that the British had been able to control nature and direct it against them, because they say they saw strange birds coming to attack them from the British positions. And one is left to ponder exactly what these accounts are referring to.
One physical clue may show the Zulus had a secret weapon.
This is one of the more intriguing and mysterious artifacts. This is actually a horn that has been used as a container for Zulu traditional medicine, which is variously known as muti or interlazy medicines when it's got a military association. And this would have been used to contain various substances which the warrior would carry about him. It would be on a thong carried round his neck like that.
Once the warriors were bound into a single force, the medicine man would build on his work, not just psychologically, but chemically. War medicines, or muti, would be handed out in elaborate pre-battle ceremonies like this. Teas would be drunk, snuffs taken, and potions sprayed on the warriors designed to make them feel invincible. Ian Knight and Tony Pollard were about to be let into the secret world of the medicine man.
When Ian Younger called me out, he gave me some of this muti, which he assures me is the actual ritual medicine that was given to warriors when they prepared them for war. I had to give him some money, and in turn I was given this. I'm told I must mix it with water and I must sprinkle it on myself and on the ground if I want to prepare myself and make myself as brave as a lion in battle. You can see here that it's an interesting mixture of herbs, and included in here as well is some of the snuff that was given to warriors to take actually during battle from their gourds. There's just a little bit of very finely ground powder in there, so it'll be interesting to find out too exactly what's inside that.
We brought the snuff to the laboratories at the University of London School for Pharmacy for chemical analysis.
The first thing we normally do there is have a look down the microscope to get a clue as to what there might be there. And when I looked down there, it did look suspiciously like cannabis, because cannabis is very distinctive, and tobacco as well.
Further tests confirm the snuff is cannabis. A series of solvents are next used in a chromatography test to split out two important compounds.
Cannabis contains a number of cannabinoids, and those are the major active ingredients of cannabis. The main ones are THC and CBD. THC is the one that gets you high, but it can induce a kind of anxiety or edginess. CBD is the one a sort of more sedative and mellow kind of effect.
This was no common or garden variety. The levels of the stimulant ingredient, THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, were extremely high. They show up on the chromatography plate as spots of pink.
What we found in this one is that the major spot was THC, and we couldn't find any evidence of any CBD.
The lack of sedative in the cannabis and such a high stimulant content made sense of what the medicine men say, that warriors on the day had unnaturally high energy levels.
The snuffs that we used in battle had the effect, whether actual or psychological, I don't know. They had the effect of concentrating your vision, making you very focused.
But Zulu accounts spoke not just of their focus in battle, but also an unnatural ferocity. The warriors claimed to see nothing but red. Cannabis couldn't be responsible for that. Could there have been something else in their arsenal of battle medicines to explain the speed and the savagery of their attack? Just how an army equipped with spears and shields could have orchestrated one of the greatest defeats of the Victorian era has mystified historians. The focus with which they attacked and the ferocity with which they slaughtered the British redcoats has never been totally understood. But the Zulus had a secret war chest of battle medicines, potions, powders, and snuffs. Some of the snuffs contained tobacco, others cannabis. But there was another, one far more potent than the rest, made from a powerful hallucinogenic mushroom.
This mushroom snuff was only used by warriors who intended not to return alive from the battlefield. We called it Inkowankowa ebomvu, the red mushroom. Let us say that you wanted to kill as many of the enemy as possible before they killed you. You took this snuff, and the snuff would have a strange effect of making your eyes sort of glazed, like a person already dying. And the enemy coming towards you will think that you are already dying, looking at your eyes. But you are very, very alert, lost in a world of glorious illusion. And you will stand up and stab the enemy, 2 or 3 of them before you fall.
The name of the mushroom must be safeguarded. At high doses, it is toxic, and the risks in taking it unsupervised would be too great. At low doses, it is safe to test. We have chosen judo as a modern form of hand-to-hand combat. Christian and Craig, 2 evenly matched players, have agreed to participate in a pharmacological trial of the mushroom under the supervision of toxicologist Professor John Henry. He is well aware of the hallucinatory properties of the mushroom.
The hallucinatory experiences that the Zulus had are very much in keeping with this kind of mushroom. People could see colors different, they could see shapes different, their perception could all be changed.
At this stage, what the effect of the mushroom would be in a combat situation is a matter of speculation.
The main active ingredient is muscimol. This is a substance that can produce a kind of detachment, lack of anxiety, lack of fear. These effects sound very like the kind of effects that one would want in a Zulu battle. One wants to be able to continue them over several hours. One wants to be able to be detached from all the things that are going on around. The bloodshed, the fact that you might be losing, but you still persist, you still keep fighting. You're not influenced by the general feel of the battle. You just go ahead and do your bit. And when people persevere like that, they're often on the winning side.
Just pop that on your finger.
Christian and Craig are first subjected to a number of physiological tests. Next, psychometric tests are conducted to assess their mood, their mental acuity, and their responsiveness to a series of visual cues. The mushroom is then given to only one participant, Christian. Craig is unaware that he is given a placebo. Within an hour, the power of the mushroom takes hold.
Start from now.
In the next bout, the physical effects are startling.
We go into the bout, and Christian's like a tiger. He just rocketed into Craig, and it was amazing. He's more disinhibited, more aggressive, more ferocious.
I felt a lot more coordinated.
You felt what?
A lot more coordinated.
More coordinated.
Yeah.
Great. You okay?
Yeah, I actually felt a lot harder, come to think of it.
What did you feel?
I feel Christian definitely did feel a bit sharper.
You say he felt sharper, and you think you felt a bit sharper.
I had more spring in my legs.
Christian's pulse rate has dramatically increased after taking the mushroom, but surprisingly, psychometric tests reveal his mental reaction times have significantly decreased. Professor Henry thinks he may have worked out why.
He just overrides it by coming out from his corner with all the... Muscle is known to give you increased muscle tension. He certainly seemed to have more strength. There's no doubt about it. He just went for him. He flew at him. It took Craig by surprise, actually.
War medicines may have made the Zulus feel stronger and less sensitive to pain. But they could not stop bullets. The Zulus had to have found a weakness that tipped the scales, allowing them to reach the British front line. There were reports from the time of the Martini-Henry rifle jamming, and specially commissioned ballistics tests were revealing that this may have been the cause of the British downfall.
You have to swing the breech open, which is cut out to accept the bullet. It's loaded by pushing your bullet into here, closing the breech, pulling the trigger, extracting the round. That is under perfect conditions now. We're not actually firing the gun in between shots, and we're not being attacked by other people.
But if the gun is fired time after time, the barrel of the rifle heats up. As it gets hotter, the breech can get clogged up with gunpowder, leaving the bullet jammed inside.
When the black powder burns, a lot of it is left behind as residue in the barrel. The drier and hotter it is, the harder this residue becomes, till you in fact end up with a coating inside the barrel, like icing on the cake. So all these highly machined precision fits are now fouled up solid by this cake of black powder.
There was another reason why the bullets could get jammed in the rifle. They were manufactured from a soft, pliable brass foil and were highly prone to damage.
I mean, we've got 5 cases here, and you can see here the amount of damage that they received just in handling. The case had been damaged by dropping on the ground or smashing ammunition boxes open. The case is distorted and would jam on the way in.
If the bullet got stuck in the barrel, there would only be one way to get it out.
The only tool a soldier had was his bayonet, which you'd have to remove from the front of a rifle and then use a point of it to try and pull or tear the cartridge case out.
A few seconds wasted by one gun jamming could be the weak link in the British firing line the Zulus were looking for.
All you can actually do with a rifle is like you see in the film, start swinging it. But if you've got 4 or 5 people armed with spears come at you, you're in trouble, you know. I'd be tempted to throw it down and run away.
A simple test will show whether the Martini-Henry rifle could have jammed that day. The gun will be fired repeatedly. The temperature of the barrel will be taken at intervals to monitor the rise in heat, the factor most likely to cause the jamming of the gun.
It's 10, 11 degrees, it's at room temperature.
The gun is then fired 12 times in quick succession. The temperature of the barrel begins to soar. With the heat of the barrel rising rapidly, after a total of 24 shots and only 3 minutes of firing, the gun jams.
We've got a jam. Okay, let's have a look. Let's take barrel temperature first of all, shall we? It's not gone up much over what it was before. It's about 45. 46, it is climbing, yeah. We've got 46 degrees there.
The gun would easily have reached temperatures of 46 degrees, enough for powder residue to cause a jam. It is statistically almost certain that in the intense heat of battle, with bullets being kicked from their boxes and soldiers fumbling to reload, that at least some guns would have jammed that day. But there is one final piece of evidence gathered by the archaeological team which will show just how critical a gun jam would be. The team has been searching for a long line of spent rifle cartridges. These cartridges fell at the feet of the soldiers as they fired, and therefore mark the exact location of the British front line. The history books have always said that the firing line extended from north to south, about 100 meters in front of the camp. The team have become convinced it's much further out, and have begun to look at least another 100 meters away, beyond the wire fences that today border the battlefield.
And lo and behold, within 10 minutes of our first grid, we found our first Martini cartridge case this side of the fence. Now, one cartridge obviously does not a firing line make, but the fact that we've got a single cartridge beyond the fence, this side of the fence, means that the firing line is somewhere out there, because you wouldn't get a single cartridge case in front of the firing line.
This single cartridge is a crucial discovery. It shows the British commanders had set up their defences too far away from the camp, forcing their soldiers to defend a much wider area of land. The only way to cover that amount of territory would be to break with their strict training to fire in a shoulder-to-shoulder formation and adopt a far looser formation, with the soldiers spread out several yards apart.
Logic would suggest actually that that's a very vulnerable and overexposed position, and despite the fact that there are probably 3 or 4 yards between each men in order to be able to cover this whole stretch of ground, they're completely confident that the firepower that they can put down will be sufficient to stop the Zulus as they attack. Of course, it doesn't work out quite like that.
In such a widely spaced formation, if one soldier's gun jams, this weak link could be the vital window through which the Zulus could pour. It had all been anticipated.
You see, we had commandos too in olden days. We had special suicide warriors whose duty was to penetrate enemy lines and to get behind the enemy. This is what happened at Isandlwana, when a crack group of warriors went behind the English lines and were able to attack the English from behind.
Just how the British defences were smashed by the Zulus can now be understood.
These men are not standing shoulder to shoulder. There are yards, feet between them. It becomes very obvious that once that firing line is actually overrun, the battle is over very quickly. These men are moving back very fast. They're not firing that much in the way of ammunition, not because they don't have it, but they don't have the damn time to fire it. And as soon as that thin line is broken, that thin red line, if you like, to use the old cliche, the game was a bogey.
It's now clear how the British army were cut down to size at Isandlwana. The smoky darkness of the eclipse hampered the ability of the British soldiers to hit their targets, giving the Zulus crucial extra time to reach the British line. With the redcoats spread too thinly, the Zulus, buoyed by battle medicines, could take advantage of a limitation of the British Martini-Henry rifle. That it could, on occasion, jam. It was the weak link needed for crack warriors to pour behind the enemy lines and finally engage in ferocious hand-to-hand combat.
Throughout the battle, the Zulus held the initiative on this battlefield. The Zulu command and control was excellent, Zulu intelligence was excellent, Zulu courage was excellent, and all of these factors combined to actually completely out-general and outmaneuver the British forces here, who are really outclassed almost from the moment that the battle begins.
The great irony is that Isandlwana would prove to be the Zulus' undoing. Britain could not countenance such a humiliating defeat. Thousands of reinforcements were sent to crush the Zulus forever, setting in place an era of subordination that has lasted until today.
War, once said my grandfather, is a lion upon whose back you fall never to get off again.